Good morning all. Thanks for attending. Just before we start, there's been a little alteration to the agenda. Item 3, which is 240734, Ridgeway Avenue, will be the first item, and then 1 and 2 will become 2 and 3. Okay, thank you. Today's meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast by the way of Council's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the Council. As you will see from the agenda papers, generally the public seating areas are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recording for webcast and or training purposes. Proposed public speakers have been made aware of the broadcasting arrangements prior to this meeting. Will members please use their microphone to contribute to the meeting, and please remember to switch off the microphone when you are finished. Members are requested to please leave their cameras on for the duration of the meeting in order to show activity participation in the committee. Also, could you ensure that you refrain from using the mobile devices during the committee and that any devices are on silent. Okay, do we have any apologies, please?
Councillors Jones and Harvey.
And Councillor Jordan, please.
And Councillor Jordan.
Yeah. You would have all received a copy of the previous minutes. Please, do I have somebody to propose them as a true record? Councillor Ellis, Councillor Perkins, thank you. So we now move on to item number 3, which we'll move forward to number 1, which is application number 24/0734, and this will be presented by Emma Brinkworth, please.
Thank you, Chair. The following application is presented to committee for the retention of a rear extension to the existing side garage and a replacement link extension between the garage and the main building of 1 Ridgeway Avenue. The application site comprises of a mixed use with a ground floor flat, first floor flat and commercial unit to the ground floor to the front. The applicant is seeking to retain these extensions for storage purposes related to the ground floor. The application has been submitted in response to an enforcement case. Councillor Fairweather and Councillor Druitt have requested that this item be presented to committee on grounds of impact on general and visual amenity. In terms of the application site itself, from aerial footage, we can see that the previous arrangement of the application site. As mentioned, the application site composed of a mixed-use property. This corner of Ridgeway Avenue is also mixed with a hair salon to the east, a pub, the Ridgeway Inn, opposite the application site, and 1A Ridgeway Avenue is situated to the west of the site. We can see the previous access arrangement to the rear garden, the lower ground floor flat, we can see that there was previously a corrugated metal and timber structure between the main property and the garage. A part of the objection that was submitted was that this pre-existing link structure was a formalised bin storage area that allowed for access to the frontage for bins to be put out for collection. This is no longer permitted as a result of the replacement extension. In terms of the internal arrangement of 1 Ridgeway Avenue, it is understood that the joint owner resides in the upper flat and the applicant in the ground floor flat. At ground floor, we can see that there is a garage to the rear, which is accessed via the driveway. For reference, this was the former layout showing the previous link extension and a driveway to the side. If we look closer at the development then, the application seeks to retain two single-storey extensions, one to the rear of the garage and one between the main property and the garage. This photo was taken prior to the completion of the development. The information submitted details the height of the garage extension, and the details submitted do also refer to solar panels, as you can see from these plans, and further information was requested to fully assess these. However, this was not forthcoming. It was agreed by the applicant that these solar panels would be removed from the submission. Although these plans do show reference of solar panels, we believe this could be addressed by adding a condition stating that, notwithstanding the approved plans, any details of solar panels should be submitted to us before the construction of them. This section shows the roof plan of both extensions. And then the link extension, the top left is of the rear and the front is to the bottom right. The key issues arising from this application are visual and residential amenity. In terms of visual amenity, the garage extension is single-storey and located out of view of from the public realm. As a result, it won't detract from the character of the area or the host property. Similarly, the link extension, which replaces an older structure, is not considered to be an obtrusive addition to the front of the property and has an acceptable appearance on the frontage of the property. With regards to residential amenity, consideration was given to the neighbouring properties, particularly to the nearest to the west of the site, which is 1A Ridgeway Avenue, and also to any current and future occupiers of the ground floor flat and first floor flat. Given the location of the garage extension and its modest scale, it's not considered that there will be an adverse impact on the residential amenity on neighbouring occupiers. Similarly, with the link extension, given its location, there would be no impact on any neighbouring occupiers. In terms of the future and current occupiers, this ground floor flat window here, the bay window, that serves a living room. So the 45-degree test was undertaken in relation to the garage and this window. It passes in the elevational view, so it's not considered that there would be an impact on daylight entering this window. In terms of the outlook from the first floor window, it's not considered that there would be a worse outlook than there is existing. In terms of the link extension, again, there would be no impact on these future or current occupiers. In terms of other issues, there would be no highway safety implications as a result of the extensions, and the highways officers offered no objection on this front. No biodiversity enhancement scheme was submitted with the submission. However, there's no reason that this couldn't be secured via a suitably worded condition. Concerns were raised a part of the application regarding bin storage. As previously mentioned, the link extension was an informalised bin storage area, and this has been removed as a result of the development. However, storage of waste is not something that can be controlled via the planning department, and it is noted from a site visit that there would be space within the driveway for a car and the storage of bins. The Environmental Health Department has also confirmed that it cannot enforce where the bins are stored. Concerns regarding emergency egress and access to the rear garden have also been raised. However, these are civil matters and does not constitute a material planning consideration. It is noted, though, that there is access from the other garage, as you can see in this photograph here, which links through to the garden just in this photograph here, which is situated in the lower right corner of the property. Concerns about the installation of a shutter on the commercial unit and the change of use of the unit from a barber to the shop were also submitted. The shutter is being considered under a separate application, and a change of use application is not required for the change of use, as both barbers and the shop fall under the A1 use class. Finally, the joint owner had stated that they did not give consent to the building work. However, this is not a material planning consideration and should be followed through via other legal route. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Now go on to public speakers. And we have a public speaker supporting the application, which is George Nicolatos. Is that okay? Okay, please.
I am George Nicolatos, the brother of Marie Adams and co-owner of One Ridgeway Avenue. I have lived in Cardiff for a few years. Following my divorce, I had to return to my previous home at One Ridgeway Avenue, downsizing from a 4-bedroom to a 1-bedroom property. I also had to downsize and relocate my retail shop from Risca. I undertook renovation and a small extension, coupled with repairs to neglected roofs. I am sorry that this matter has now reached the panel's attention. The sole complainant is my sister and co-owner. All other neighbours have complimented on the changes and told me that it has refreshed the tired look of the front of One Ridgeway Avenue. I am selling high-value merchandise, radio control models, and it is critical to have some space and security. I mistakenly assumed, under permitted development rules, the garage link, the extension, and the shutter would be permissible. Having been made aware that this is not permissible due to multi-occupancy, I applied for retrospective planning. My sister is opposed, having initially not objected at the extension, going as far as suggesting that I should pull it all the way to the back of the garden. The building is complete, and I would respectfully ask the committee to approve the retrospective application, as the sole person who is objecting has got a vendetta. One final point is that the co-owner does not reside in Newport. She drives a foreign registered Volvo and has taken an unhealthy interest in the building, having previously ignored issues with the garage and link extension. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We now have a public speaker against Marie Adams, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Marie Adams, the other co-owner of the property at One Ridgeway Avenue, and I thank you for the opportunity to address this committee today. I'd like to offer the following comments, specifically to do with the link extension first. The committee paper refers to 2 previously approved planning applications which were granted in 90 and 97. However, it fails to take account of those planning decisions in its current recommendations to you today, and this on 2 points. Firstly, the importance of the unhindered and safe access to the public road following the installation of a fire escape staircase. The link extension has now blocked this passageway off, and the planning application does not recognise this significant fact. Secondly, the issue of parking is also ignored. With the build of the link extension, which replaced a temporary wooden structure, the property has lost 1 off-road parking space. The property has 4 bedrooms in all, and therefore we had 4 off-road parking spaces. Parking at the bottom end of Ridgeway Avenue today is at a premium, and especially so since the council has very recently painted a large designated area on the road for the bus stop, which is directly opposite our property. I'd like to turn now to the garage extension, which is a storeroom. Mr. Nicolatos has installed a large interconnecting floor-to-ceiling opening between the garage and this storeroom. The submitted drawings do not identify this, but refer to the old garage window. This opening hints at a potential change of use of the residential garage in direct contravention to the granted conditions of the 1997 planning application. Secondly, the storage room itself was built over what used to be our patio. It was an area where friends and family gathered to socialise over barbecues. The patio was located such for its convenient proximity to the kitchens of both flats and opposite both living rooms. Our patio is now gone, and this storage room is directly and very significantly impacting our enjoyment of the property. The storage room is situated far too close to the living room of both flats at just over 2 metres, and there is a clear loss of view with the outlook unacceptably closed in. It's overbearing, it is unsightly and not in keeping with the appearance of the property. Nobody wants to be staring at a storeroom or at its flat roof with solar panels located only 2 metres away from your living room window. In light of these facts, I will go as far as saying that I fail to see how the existing building developments meet the objectives of good design. The Newport Local Development Plan, GP2, GP4, GP6, as well as the supplementary planning guidance. I also wish to stress that I have not received notice from Mr. Michelatos, nor have I received any consultation letters from the Council. In conclusion, I firmly object to the building works undertaken, as well as the retrospective planning application, which is riddled with inaccuracies and is misleading. I urge the committee to reject the approval of the retrospective application today. There has to be closer scrutiny and respect of past planning decisions and seamless continuity in the proposed ways forward. So in essence, the unhindered and safe access to the public road needs to be immediately reinstated. The lost off-road parking space also needs to be reinstated. The double garage needs to remain for solely residential use, and our patio needs to be restored. I'd like to finish off with 2 small points. We wouldn't be here today if Mr. Michelatos had abided correctly by the Council planning procedures in seeking first advice and then approval of a planning application before the commencement of significant building works. He has also not sought my permission, which is why I'm taking legal action against him for gross infringement of my property rights. With this, I close my intervention, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Councillor Truitt.
Thank you, Chair. I strongly object to this planning application on the following grounds. This application contains serious inaccuracies and misleading statements. It falsely claims Mrs. Adams has given her consent for the submission of the application, but in reality, Mrs. Adams strongly objects, strongly opposes the application, and was neither consulted nor provided with any formal notice. The application states construction began on 1st of August 2024. However, photographic evidence proves clearly that a new roof was installed as early as June the 12th, 24, and the link extension was well underway by mid-July. Mr. Michelatos claims to have provided Mrs. Adams with a notice of works on 4th of April. However, Mrs. Adams never received such a notice, which raises serious concerns about compliance. Safety must be a highest priority, and this application introduces significant risks. I refer to Planning Application Permission 90-0171F. This approval explicitly required an external staircase to ensure first-floor residents had a secondary means of escape in case of emergency. I refer to 1996 Planning Permission 96-1082F. This permission allowed the construction of a double garage, but strictly prohibited any wall between the garage and the main house to ensure a clear, unobstructed emergency escape route from the property to the public highway. Current applications impact the unauthorised link extension between the shop and the garage, which has already been built, blocks the crucial escape route. The new structure includes 2 locked doorways, creating a dead end that leaves residents trapped in the event of an emergency. This is a serious fire hazard and violates essential safety provision. The newly constructed extension is overbearing and oppressive. The downstairs living room now faces a blank wall, replacing what was previously an open space, significantly reducing natural light and marking key living areas and leaving key living areas feeling confined and overshadowed. The Planning Officer report acknowledges that the 45-degree rule is breached on plan, proving that the extension is too close to habitable rooms. At just 2 metres from both living rooms, this structure creates an oppressive and claustrophobic environment. The extension also shades a bedroom, further diminishing quality of living rooms. The noise and disruption from the already installed roller shutters causes excessive noise during the night in windy conditions. In conclusion, this planning application is flawed and given that the misrepresentation of ownership consent and planning history, the serious fire safety and emergency escape hazards, the harmful impact on residents' quality of life, non-compliance with previous planning permissions and unauthorised and disruptive modifications, I urge the Planning Committee to reject this application.
Thank you, Councillor Truitt. We'll now open the floor to questions from the committee, please. Councillor Owells.
Thanks, Chair. Could I ask the planning officers to provide some comments on the issues raised by the objector and the local councillor in relation to the loss of a parking space, the points made about previous planning conditions and the failure of the 45-degree test?
With regard to the loss of the parking space, previous aerial footage shows that that parking space has been blocked off since at least August 2012. This hasn't been a formalised parking area since then. The structure that has been built is a more permanent feature, it is understood, but in terms of what is lawful, this structure has been there since 2012, so the parking space has been lost since then. With regard to the 45-degree test, it is noted that it did pass in the elevational view, so it's not considered that there would be a loss of light into the windows of the ground floor flat. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, Councillor, there are no conditions, or as noted in the report, there are no conditions requiring the parking to be retained on the previous 2 permissions. There's no conditions with regards to the access that's referred to. That would be a building control matter.
Okay, yeah.
Just in relation to the 45-degree test, there are 2 tests that we're looking at. Then one is the plan, one is the elevation. Does the SPG suggest that if one passes and another fails, that's sufficient? Or does the SPG suggest that both need to be passed? Or is one more favourable than the other?
The planning guidance states that if both tests fail, in that case it would be unacceptable. It doesn't refer to whether if one passes and one doesn't, it would be unacceptable. It's only if it fails the both.
Any further questions? Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, really. Are council officers happy that there is sufficient storage space for the bins? Because I believe that should be a condition.
Yeah, there's the space on the drive to have bins. Because we're not looking at a plan application for the creation of flats, it is simply extensions to the garage. It wouldn't be reasonable for us to require a condition to impose, to require where the bins would go. But in reality, that's where they're going, and there is room for them there.
Chair, in the previous application, I believe that the storage bins were used in the link, or agreed that it would be used in the link, but now that is not going to be. So are we not making a condition that the bins have a specific storage space?
No, Councillor. There was no condition on either the previous consents requiring waste bin storage locations to be provided and retained. So they could be stored anywhere in the site. We'd have no control over that. So it wouldn't be necessary or reasonable for the extensions to do that.
Further?
It's another question, it is, Chair. It's referenced the garage. What concerns me, can we put some sort of condition on that it's not to be developed into living accommodation?
I don't think it would be necessary to add a condition in this case, as if there were a change of use from the garage into a livable space. An additional planning application would have to be submitted for that change of use, so it wouldn't be reasonable. Thank you.
Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just get some clarification, please, on a couple of points? One is there seems to be a bit of dispute about the notification that was sent out, whether it was received or not. Do we have any proof of delivery or proof of receipt regarding that notification? And the second question is, can we just get it clarified about the fire access and the emergency escape routes? Does that fall under planning regulations, or is that a building consideration that we have to basically ignore? Can I just get that clarified, please? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm looking at our records here, and we did send a letter out to the occupier of the first floor flat. So that letter was sent out on the 30th of October 24, so we do have that record. In terms of the external staircase, and fire safety, that's a building control issue, not a planning matter.
That's what I thought. Thanks very much.
Councillor Rheoli? You're on mute, Councillor Rheoli. As much as I like it. Councillor Rheoli, you're on mute.
No longer, Chairman, no longer. Thank you for your patience. Just clarification. I hear that there's a dispute amongst owners here. I believe that's correct, that this property is owned by two individuals. One individual claims they knew nothing about the planning application or the works and objects to retrospective planning. Is this a consideration for the planning committee, or can anybody just apply for planning permission without telling the other owner?
Yeah, you can submit anybody can submit a plan application, but if there are any other owners, then there are procedures that the applicant has to serve notice on the other owners about the plan application, and then they submit a certificate to us to indicate that that's been done.
There seems to be a dispute whether or not this has actually happened. And there seems to be, allegedly, the other owner is claiming no knowledge of this. Do we have any evidence that they've ever received anything? So, in other words, even though I don't disbelieve that the letter was sent, do we have any evidence, recorded delivery, that the information was received?
We wouldn't have that, Councillor. The applicant, when they submit an application, has to ensure that they complete the correct certificate. The application is right to their knowledge. They have said they've served notice, and we take that at face value. Effectively, the notice is to make someone aware. The whole purpose of it is not to get their consent that the application can be submitted. It's to make them aware an application has been submitted. So in this case, as we know, the owner is aware that an application has been made. They may disagree with that. As Steve has alluded to, you can apply for planning permission on anyone else's land as long as you make them know. It would be a separate civil matter as to whether they can go ahead and proceed to construct.
Thank you very much indeed. That's clear.
Councillor Linton?
Thank you, Chair. I've just been looking at the photographs and the plans on there, and I can see it's a visual impact on the extension and the link in between is a great improvement on the street scene, I think, rather than having that old wooden structure linking the two. So I can only see it as being an improvement on the street scene. Thank you.
Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Rowley's points, I think Andrew just answered this, but I want to just make sure I've understood it correctly. There's no obligation for both owners to agree then to a planning application. One owner can submit the planning application, they just have to inform the other owner that that's been done. If we then as a planning committee agreed with the application and we approved it, is it then a civil matter for the co-owner to lodge an objection through the courts then rather than through planning? So I suppose what I'm asking really is, even if we approve this, that's not necessarily the end of the road. Am I right in making that assumption?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor. There are other separate processes, consents the owner would need to get, including the landowner's permission. So it would be a separate civil matter. It wouldn't be a planning issue.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Okay, we go on to the recommendation. The recommendation is to grant with conditions. Could all those in favour please raise their hands? Sorry, yeah. After the proposer, Councillor Ewell, second. Councillor Perkins. All those in favour please raise their hands again. Okay, that's passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're not obliged to stay over if you'd like to leave. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 1, which is application 24/0840. And the presenting officer will be Vicky Quinn, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. This application is for the change of use of a 3-bedroom residential property to a 5-bedroom house in multiple occupation. A HMO is a house occupied by people who are usually unrelated and have private bedrooms but shared facilities such as kitchens, living areas and bathrooms. The property is a mid-terrace dwelling fronting Clean Road, which is one of the main arterial routes into the city centre. The house is located approximately 140 metres to the nearest bus stop that takes you into the city centre. The district centre and spa convenience store are approximately 80 metres from the site. The property scores very highly in sustainability terms, being within such close proximity to frequent bus services and close walk-in distances to local shops and services. The property offers a small front forecourt and small rear enclosed garden. There is no off-road parking. The proposed layout would comprise 2 bedrooms, kitchen and communal lounge at ground floor, and 3 bedrooms at first floor. All bedrooms would be served by an ensuite bathroom and the communal garden is accessed through the kitchen. Bin storage would be within the front forecourt as per the existing arrangement. The property is currently a house and will remain a house. In this case, 5 tenants are proposed. As a 3-bedroom dwelling, we can typically expect 4 or 5 occupants, albeit these will normally be related. In a HMO, like a dwelling, the occupants are expected to live as a household, sharing facilities in the property. However, typically, they will occupy with a tenancy agreement or contracts per room or occupant. Whilst the house could be rented by a family or 3 or more unrelated individuals, it is a residence either way, and rent may be paid to a landlord in either scenario. The personal details of occupants themselves is not a planning matter. The main considerations of this application are the potential impacts of the change of use on parking provision and highway safety, as well as the impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area and neighbouring properties. This can also include matters of social cohesion and fears of crime, albeit the weight that can be afforded to these considerations is dependent upon the fear of crime being objectively justified rather than assumptions not supported by evidence as to the character of future occupiers. We know this from case law. The proposal is within the urban area, has a lawful residential use and is located on a main thoroughfare through Newport with easy access to local services in the nearby district centre. These factors accord with the principles set out in Strategic Policy SP1 of the adopted Local Development Plan. Policy H8 of the adopted LDP relates to self-contained accommodation and houses multiple occupation, and says that HMOs will only be permitted where specified criteria are met. Excuse me. The full policy wording is set out in paragraph 7.5 of the Officer Report. The adopted HMO SPG, which must also be afforded substantial weight in decision-making, states that clusters of HMOs can alter the composition of a community and detract from local visual amenity. The guidance introduces a threshold above which HMOs are considered to detract from the character of the area. In general, the Council will not support a planning application that would take the number of HMOs considered as a proportion of the local housing stock above a specified limit. This site is located within the 10% threshold. When taking a 50-metre radius from the address point of the application site, the full front elevations of 30 properties are caught. There is one existing registered HMO within the 50-metre radius, which is number 188 Clean Road. Therefore, if the application were to proceed, the 2 HMOs would constitute 6.6% of the selected housing stock and is therefore less than the 10% threshold. Consequently, HMO concentration levels are not grounds to refuse permission in this case. In terms of amenity considerations for future occupier, the HMO units, there is a communal living room and kitchen located at ground floor. Access to rear yard that currently serves the 3-bedroom dwelling is provided to future residents and will include a bike storage area. No external alterations are proposed and no changes that may encourage the property to stand out or appear different to other residences in the street. The property appears to have stood vacant for a while, and refuse receptacles are stored behind the front boundary walls within the forecourt area, and this will continue to be the case with the HMO. And the HMO will have comparable receptacles to a single dwelling. All bedrooms exceed the required space standards and contain windows providing adequate light and ventilation for occupiers. The maximum number of occupants can be controlled via planning condition, and the applicant will also have to obtain a HMO licence from the Council's Environmental Health HMO Licensing Department, which would limit occupants. The living room and kitchen exceed the required space standards. In relation to parking and highways matters, the existing dwelling has 3 bedrooms, and this generates a parking demand of 3 spaces calculated using the SPG. There is no parking on site. The proposed 5-bedroom HMO will require 1 space per bedroom plus 1 visitor space, which is a total of 6 spaces, which is a net gain of 3, and would need to be accommodated on the highway. The Council's SPG represents guidance only and should not be prescriptively applied. Existing parking problems and concerns regarding a worsening of the existing situation and subsequent highway safety matters have been raised as significant concerns with the resident objections and also the local councillor response. The application has been accompanied by a submission of a parking survey. The survey concludes that sufficient parking spaces were available within the area surveyed, albeit some parts of the street show 100% capacity. The Council's highways officers advise that there are a number of flaws with the parking survey, including insufficient allowance for junctions and existing accesses. However, the highways officer does not object to the proposals on the grounds of parking, and he considers that the additional spaces generated by the proposals can be accommodated on street and do not significantly differ to the lawful use. In short, there is no technical highway safety objection to this application on parking grounds. Furthermore, the site is located within a highly sustainable area just outside of Cynllunio District Centre, which offers a variety of shops and services and public transport links. The local planning authority has tested appeal decisions on HMOs in relation to lack of parking several times in recent years. All have been dismissed at appeal. In this case, we know that the site is sustainable. In this case, we know that the site is sustainable and there is no technical highway safety objection on parking grounds.
Sorry, Chair, we can't hear.
Can you hear me? Hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In this case, we know the site is sustainable and there is no technical highway safety objection on parking grounds. Demand for parking arising from HMO uses, particularly where these form a very low proportion of the housing stock in the 50-metre catchment area, is not considered to be a robust reason for refusing planning permission, even though...
Vicky, can I hold with there a minute, please? Councillor Rheoli, can you turn your camera on, please?
My camera is on according to me. I can...
It certainly is now. Thank you, Councillor
camera...
Rheoli.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can now, thank you.
No, could you see me before?
We can see you now, yes, thank you.
Yeah, what? No, Chair. Why were you questioning whether
The camera was off, Councillor Rheoli.
Well, we have an issue then, because my camera has not been turned on.
Councillor, it appears that it appears off in the chamber, but for people who are online, we can see that you're online. We were just checking, thank you.
Oh, no, that's okay, because that's a worry because of the recent threats that we've all, you know, I'm not going to go any further. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Demand for parking arising from HMO uses, particularly where these form a very low proportion of the housing stock in the 50-metre catchment area, is not considered to be a robust reason for refusing planning permission, even though the potential for on-road parking demand is acknowledged. For example, in the recent appeal case of 287 Cynllunio Road, which is located to the north of the site, outside of the 50-metre radius, an inspector considered the council's refusal of a conversion to a 9-bedroom HMO for parking reasons. The appellant's survey showed several roads at 100% parking stress, with other streets showing that parking spaces were available. The survey concluded, like this one, that there is sufficient capacity within the local area to accommodate the additional vehicles required by the council's parking standards. Even though the inspector did not consider the available parking spaces to be plentiful and at times competition for spaces... Sorry, that was my fault. Even though the inspector did not consider the available parking spaces to be plentiful and at times competition for spaces could be difficult for residents and visitors alike, he confirmed that long-established high-density housing areas often have on-street parking inconveniences owing to competition for the road space available. The peak demand for local on occasions will inevitably outstrip supply, which means that people sometimes have to park away from their homes. Although the use of such space would require walking from the property to an available on-street parking space, such arrangements are not uncommon in urban areas with limited off-street parking. Planning Policy Wales states that parking standards should be applied flexibly and informed by local context, including public transport accessibility, urban design principles, and the objective of reducing reliance on private car while supporting a modal shift to walking, cycling and public transport. In the appeal case, and in this case, the site is a short walking distance from a range of shops and services within Cynllunio Road District Centre, which include convenience stores, restaurants, cafes, takeaways and a public house. There are also bus stops nearby offering frequent and regular services to the city centre and its wider facilities, services and employment opportunities. It is likely that future residents would rely on the fact that the property is within a sustainable location and with local facilities being highly accessible by walking and cycling and having a frequent local bus service. Also, as HMOs generally offer more comfortable living accommodation, more affordable accommodation, that should have been, sorry, if located within highly sustainable locations, the inspector in the Cynllunio Road case and other appeal cases we have seen considers it likely that the proposed HMO would be more attractive to tenants who do not own a car. And it is reasonable to expect that car ownership within the proposed HMO would be lower than the one per bedroom set out in the parking standards. Having regard to the recent appeal decisions, the generally positive attitude of Welsh Inspectorate to HMOs in sustainable locations, irrespective of whether they have off-street parking, the policy move of maximum parking standards rather than minimum standards within the SPG, the parking survey undertaken by the applicant and the lack of objection from the Council's highways officer to parking, it is considered that there is no demonstrable adverse effect in relation to parking demand that could be robustly argued to impact upon highway safety or upon neighbouring amenity in this case. The applicant has submitted details of cycle storage on plans to the rear of the property. The Council's highways officer has objected as it can only be accessed via the property. This arrangement is common with terrace properties, and in this case it is considered that a secure store at the rear of the property offers safe and suitable storage for cycles to the benefit of the future occupiers of the property and can be secured by condition. A number of issues have been raised with the objections received by local residents relating to the perception of HMOs and who the occupants would be. Gwent Police have advised that the development location is not currently being affected by any significant ongoing crime trends or patterns, and no objection is raised by them to the proposals. Concerns have been received regarding noise and requesting additional soundproofing between the bedrooms and neighbouring properties. However, on the basis of the size and layout of the proposed HMO with 2 bedrooms on the ground floor together with a communal kitchen and living area and 3 bedrooms at first floor, the HMO is of a relatively small scale comparable to a single dwelling. It will function akin to a family dwelling with sleeping spaces at first floor and communal space at ground floor. The property is of a solid construction, and whilst a degree of noise transmission may be expected in some scenarios, there is no clear risk of excessive and unacceptable noise disturbance arising from the occupation of the property in this way. Additional sound insulation is not considered warranted. The Council's building control officers advise that only HMOs housing 6 or more people would potentially require additional acoustic measures. Should future issues arise in terms of nuisance from noise occupiers of the HMO or future occupiers of the neighbouring dwellings upon the HMO, the Council's Environmental Health Service are able to investigate and address proven nuisance arising from noise. Officers have therefore considered the application and the comments received and recommend that the application is granted subject to the stated conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. There are no public speakers. Councillor Howland, you'd like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hearing me this morning. Members of the committee will be familiar with the arguments I will be putting forward. They need to be restated for this and any such application in St Julian's Ward. 176 Cynllunio Road, the change of use from a 3-bedroom dwelling to a 5-bedroom HMO is neither wanted nor desirable. There are 20 objectors and no support from any residents for this application. A general principle of democracy is that we do things with people rather than to people, and this seems to be a case in point when we are totally flying in the face of any form of democracy. The purpose of this application, I would suggest, is purely a money-making scheme with no benefits whatsoever to the community. Houses that are rented nearby attract a rent of some £1,250 per month. A room in an HMO is available for at least £600 a month. How much better for the developer if he or she can get a return of £3,000 a month? This is purely a formulaic application, like so many you've heard before, with no benefit whatsoever to the community or Newport as a whole. There are 13 HMOs on Cynllunio Road, 2 if we include this one, 3 in close proximity, with many more in roads leading off. There are also a number of properties in the area that are being used as HMOs that do not come under the regulations, as they were probably established before these constraints were put in place. When I've stood before you previously, I've been asked to name HMOs that haven't come under the regulations, and I've tried to do it in this case, and the one that's in very close proximity, I believe, has been visited by officers and found not to be an HMO, even though the neighbours on either side are adamant it's being used as such. The objectors cite traffic congestion, lack of parking, and making one of the main arterial routes of the city effectively a one-directional street, with the need for buses, lorries, etc. to give way as they come down through Cynllunio Road. Again, is this what we want for a main arterial route? Adding more cars to it is certainly not going to help. There have been suggestions in other planning applications that regulations can be put in the tenancy agreements that forbid other people from having cars. This can't be done. It just isn't lawful. I know you've heard all these objections before, but they're still just as relevant in this case. The houses in this area were built as family homes. Some of them were converted to flats in recent years, which seems to have been accepted by adjacent neighbours. The proposal now to further subdivide them is totally unacceptable. It may have some merit if these buildings were to produce additional living spaces. Their original intention was for a 2 plus 2.5 family to occupy them, with, of course, some large families. Moving a single person into this area does nothing for social cohesion. When the Planning Committee has approved previous applications, each was treated as an individual application, with no consideration given to the wider community. The local shopping centre has totally changed the retail offering, gone the butchers, the greengrocers and utility shops that once supported by local households, replaced by cafes and fast food outlets. Is this really what we want for our society? The schools that once supported the local population have changed in terms of catchment, with children being drawn from all over our city. Glanusk is a very popular school, and the number of children that come from outside the catchment increases every year. The school run creating further traffic problems as there are a diminishing number of local children. which will be the case as long as HMOs are allowed to multiply. You have heard the arguments put forward previously about additional litter and general antisocial behaviour. This always seems to have been ignored until such actions can be proven. If you pass this today, that will be put at the end. That will be the end of the planning officers' roles, and it will pass to regulating officers to try and control the problems caused. One of the greatest blights on our city today is fly tipping and littering. HMOs, such as the one proposed today, are acknowledged to be adding to the problem. The supplementary planning guidance you are working on, I believe, is out of date and desperately in need of amendment. Hence, I would ask you to look at the whole area and treat as one cohesive community, which it was designed for, not the piecemeal approach that is being taken today. We are not opposed to well-designed and regulated homes for single people, and the development on Crawford Street, due to start this month, is an example of what we should be aiming for. Radius and dots on maps, that's all you've really heard about today. No assessment made for the social cohesive effects on the communities. A bike saw in the rear, which is just a sop to the greening policies. At least it's not like the one you passed last year when the bike saw was at the end of the heavily fenced area and has never been used, to the best of my knowledge, for that purpose. Is this what you want for Newport? I respectfully ask you to reject this application for the conversion of 176 Cullion Road into an HMO, as it is unwanted and a further blight on this designated family area. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Councillor Heron. I now open the floor to questions. Councillor Howells.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to pick up on the issue of parking initially, because the comments from the highways suggest that the parking submission is flawed, essentially. Then reaches a conclusion that there's no impact based on the original use, yet there's a doubling of space requirement. So the information before the committee is one of sort of opinion rather than expert, if I may, and I don't think we ought to be determining an application based on parking with a flawed report that we can't sort of get an accurate reading of the impact on the streets. Whilst I accept that you know, there have been some recent decisions from inspectors that have been adverse to our decision making, we have to follow our supplementary planning guidance, and our supplementary planning guidance is clear. And I accept the councillor's point that it's significantly outdated, and I have called for it to be updated at council more than once. But we should follow our SPG, and the SPG says that the parking here isn't sufficient to be approved. Second, if I could just touch on the flood point and check that this probably isn't in a flood area at all, just get confirmation of that, so that we don't need to consider any escape situations. And then thirdly, in terms of there being adequate amenity for future occupiers, which is a consideration that we should give in the SPG, I'm not sure any consideration has been given to that at all in the officer's report. The property contains very small bedrooms that just about meet the minimum requirements. The measurements don't include bathroom measurements. There is a minimum size for bathrooms in HMOs nationally. I don't believe that we have any local guidance that trumps that. The guidance for shower rooms in HMOs is 2.2 square metres, and these en-suites that are in each room look very, very small, and we don't have the information before us to be able to conclude whether they meet that minimum size or not. So for me, the shared space, the kitchen and the living room is very, very small in 19 square metres for 5 different occupiers. If we were to grant this, I would suggest that there ought to be a condition that the rooms are only occupied by one person and not couples, because I think we couldn't grant that based on the current space standards and future amenity for occupiers if there were 10 people in these properties effectively. So if I could get some comment around that parking and just confirmation that there's no flood matters to consider, and then some commentary or thought being given to the amenity for future occupiers' use. Thanks.
Yeah, in answer to your query about is it in the flood risk area, it's not. It's outside of the flood risk area, so that's not a consideration. So in relation to parking, you are correct in that the parking survey submitted is flawed, and our highways officer has picked up on that. And what he's referring to in terms of those flaws is that they've included areas such as next to junctions, which you shouldn't be parking on. But what he's concluded is that even with those flaws, the survey demonstrates there's sufficient space to accommodate the spaces required. So the parking survey, despite the flaws, still shows that those spaces required, the additional spaces created by this proposal, can be accommodated on street, and that's why he's not objected. In terms of bedroom sizes, so our SPG, I don't believe, has any guidance on that, but licensing have their own guidance, and as it's stated in the officer report, the bedroom sizes exceed those sizes, so they go above what is required by licensing standards. I'm not sure whether, if I can go back to, I'm not sure whether the en-suites, whether we've got those sizes. No, so it says there on the floor plan, we've got the size of the bedrooms excluding the en-suite, so we don't know what the sizes are for the en-suites. And I'm not sure that licences standards require a minimum size for en-suite bathrooms, but certainly the bedrooms exceed the standards required. I think that's all the points that you made. I think I've addressed those.
Can I just come back on the parking point, Chair, if that's okay? What you said and what the highways officer says in your report slightly differ, really, because he sort of says there's no overall impact. He doesn't say there's sufficient space for parking on the street. So is that a conclusion he's reached and hasn't been put in the report? I haven't looked at his response, actually, on the planning portal, but they differ, and they're different things, really, aren't they? Because he's making a conclusion that there's sufficient parking, as opposed to saying there's no impact from the original use, and the wording in the report, I'll have to scroll back to find it now, was suggesting there's no sort of impact from the original use, and that was the word you used as well when you made your presentation. And they're two different things, because there's a parking space requirement of 3 in the original use and 6 in this use, so that's a double. So it's just that kind of being clear whether we're reaching a conclusion based on his assessment of the highway, and therefore we ought to see a copy of a parking report from him, or is he saying it's just not going to impact? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, it does. And we've got the highways officer with us, so I will bring him in a minute. It's important to note a few things here. The parking SPG was adopted in 2015, August 2015, almost 10 years ago. The SPG is guidance. It's not intended to be applied rigidly, effectively. It refers to considerations of the merits of the scheme, sustainability, everything we look at. Since then, we've had a lot of appeal decisions that talk about Planning Policy Wales and the move away from providing parking provision to look at a modal shift, effectively. So we've had parking surveys, we've had an application at appeal on 23 Arundel Road, where the stress was 96% in terms of the parking provision. Again, 5-bed HMO. The inspector said it's likely to encourage modal shift. It's in a sustainable location. There's not going to be an issue. So the first thing is there parking provision? No. What's the impact of that? Does it cause a highway safety issue? Now, I believe what the highways officer is saying, I'll bring him in now, is that we've got no evidence that this proposal is going to have a highway safety impact on the basis of what we know and what the way policy is going. But I will bring, I think it's Kevin is online, so I'll bring Kevin in if he is available. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, so in terms of meeting the number, well, let's start with the actual survey. The way that the survey should be presented, there is a certain methodology called Lambeth methodology, which is accepted pretty much throughout the UK. And if the survey is done to that methodology, it proves a case quite clearly. The survey wasn't done to that methodology, so I have criticised it. However, one of the parts of that methodology is to include photographs. And it does include photographs that clearly demonstrate and show that there are parking spaces that can be used that are not in dangerous locations. So that is all it really needs to do at the end of the day. Whilst I can argue that they haven't done it very well, they have shown that there are some parking spaces, and there are more parking spaces than the SPG would require. Also, if we think about, if we did refuse this and we went to an appeal, there is a lot of data out there that shows that the SPG demanding one space per bedroom is actually very high. The typical car ownership for HMOs is less than one car per 2 bedrooms. So firstly, it's difficult to defend the SPG, but in any case, they have shown that there are that number of spaces with photographic evidence. Is that a bit clearer?
Yeah, that does help. I think the confusion is in the report is that the sort of comment is it does not consider it likely that parking demand would increase significantly from a change of use. Yeah, it's doubling, so it's that sort of difference. And well, so the clarification is helpful.
It depends whether you're referring to SPG or sort of numbers that are demonstrable. It can be shown that it won't be likely. Obviously, everyone's different. It depends on the quality very much. If you have a very nice HMO and you attract sort of very well-paid working professionals, then the likelihood is they do all have a car. But the reality in most cases is that people live in HMOs for financial reasons, and they don't necessarily have a job and they don't necessarily have a car.
Yeah, thank you. Could I just get a final comment on the point I made about whether we could impose a condition that these rooms would be one person or two person?
Yeah, sure, I can pick up on that. There is a condition recommended, condition 4, that restricts the HMO to having 5 bedrooms and 5 occupiers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of comments and a question. I think the one question about the parking has been more or less answered, but I wouldn't mind just getting clarification why the parking survey was done at 1 in the morning. I'm just wondering how realistic the figures would be. I can understand that there would be obviously more residents parking there then, because during the day a lot of residents would have obviously moved, gone to work or whatever. Yeah. But I would have thought that during the day that those residents that have gone to work, they would be more than compensated by people driving into the area for shopping, etc. And I would have expected that area to be busier during the day. So I'm just wondering why it was done at 1 in the morning. In terms of the comments, Councillor Huhine said that some of his things have been well rehearsed before, and this is one thing that I said again many, many times, but it still needs to be raised, I think. The density of HMOs in certain areas, we have this 50-metre radius, and I understand the argument that we could draw the line anywhere, but it still does worry me that we don't seem to be taking into effect or taking into account the effect on the whole community rather than just small portions of it. And I do think that this density of HMO question needs to be looked at in relation to the whole community, not just a 50-metre radius. In this particular case, I don't think it has a massive effect. In one we're going to look at later, I think it has a bigger effect. Also, I've got to raise some concerns about some of the comments that I read in the report. These are public comments, and obviously because they're in the report, as a planning committee, we have to take these comments into consideration, but there's a lot of assumptions and perceptions about HMOs. You know, there is a place for HMOs. Lots of different types of people do use them. I think there's a perception that a certain type of people, a certain type of person uses HMOs, and there's always that assumption that there's going to be increased antisocial behaviour, increased littering, increased fly tipping, crime levels, etc. I think we, as a planning committee, it's important that we do recognise and consider those concerns, but I also think that evidence and data is far more important, and we need to look at the data from the police, how many complaints they've had, etc. Data from highways. That's far more important, I think, than just perception of what might happen or could happen. And there was one set of comments that really did concern me, where terms like asylum seeker, illegal immigrants, refugees are all used interchangeably, and the word illegal always seems to go in front of the word immigrant. It's just almost like an automatic thing. And I don't want to make this a political point, obviously, but I think it seems to be a reflection of the world we're living in at the moment. But because it's in the report and it's something we have to consider, that really does worry me. You know, asylum seekers and refugees are not illegal immigrants. There was a phrase in it that said that Newport has become a city of sanctuary for illegal immigrants. That's factually incorrect. We're not. We don't, as a council, encourage illegal immigrants.
Councillor Reynolds, can we just stick to the application, please?
Yeah, sorry. It's just that because this is in the report, that is something we have to consider, and it's factually incorrect. But can I have a comment on the parking survey? Why it was done at 1 in the morning? Thank you.
Kevin?
That goes back to what I was saying before about the accepted methodology. So the rationale is basically that most people that have cars will use those cars during the day, probably to go to work, for example. So to find the maximum demand, we look at when those people are back at home or likely to be back at home, and that's why the surveys are routinely done in the middle of the night, basically. I appreciate what you're saying about, you know, there are other demands, and that's a perfectly valid point, but the thing is, in terms of the actual parking demand for the residential use, its peak is at the night. So those that own the cars probably don't have many, there won't be many of them around in the day, so we don't need as many spaces in the day for that particular use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I'd probably query some of that, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah, thanks.
It's the sort of accepted wisdom, if you like. Whilst you can pick holes in it to some degree, and in some instances we will insist on having lots of surveys at different times, not just in the evening. That is the norm. That is the standard approach.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rheoli.
Thank you, Chair. The SPG is a non-statutory advice document. Well, I agree, it needs updating and reviewing. It's only advice, and that's what I'm going to leave that. There is a need for this type of dwelling. It's where we place it seems to be the issue. There are people on different journeys in their life, Chairman, and this type of quality, even though one may say it's at the lower end of the beginning of somebody getting accommodation, let's not be judgmental about who goes in there. They're beginning to get their lives back together, and God bless them. but we need this type of accommodation. Do we need it there? I'm not sure, but the evidence is on planning. I see no reason to reject it at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Rheoli. Councillor Linton.
Right, Chair, thank you. Just an issue I just picked up on with Councillor Rain. When the speakers come before us, are they given any advice on what's relevant to the planning laws and planning issues? Because I noticed there was mention of financial matters within there and the like, which I don't believe is a material planning issue. So just querying that, really.
So two things, Councillor. Firstly, on the Council's website, when people comment on an application, and I'll pick up on what Councillor Reynolds has said as well very briefly, we advise that we will consider material planning considerations, and we give an indication of what is and what isn't a planning consideration, and we give some examples. You'll note in the report on this one, the concluding sentence of paragraph 7.2 states that we're not going to consider, this is a residential use, and we can't go into concerns of the identity of future occupants. You'll also be aware that there's a code of practice for members that says effectively members should stick to material planning considerations. Sometimes there can be a bit of a grey area over what that is, but yes, members should be sticking to material planning considerations. Someone's financial gain off an application would not be material in this instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Still on parking, I'm concerned that, Chair, that how often or when was the survey, or what was the extent of the survey done in regards to the parking? Was it just one road or a number of roads? The other one is, Chair, we are a bit reluctant to put parking conditions on properties because of public transport. Yet we as a planning department don't consult with public transport in regards to what services are provided, because it's privately owned. It's not owned by Newport City Council. So they can withdraw these services whenever they feel like. A prime example is this year in April, there's a number of services of which been withdrawn from the service. So it could affect this type of thing. I think there's only 2 buses that actually go past this particular property, that's St Julian's and Cynllunio. If one of those are withdrawn, then that service is no longer available to these people. So that's what really concerns me, is this. It's not the first time this has occurred. The other one is item 5.1, the parking survey. It says, I understand what the highways officer has said, but it does increase the parking volume, because it says demand would increase or would not increase significantly. So it would increase, but not significantly. So how often does this go on? You know, the next time it'll be exactly the same. It won't increase significantly. The other one, Chair, is we're looking at HMO for 176. Now, according to 6.1, is it? I believe it's 6.1. At the first neighbour's comment there, we have previously operated 174 as a HMO. Now, is this a HMO still, or is it just a house being occupied by a number of people, or have they relinquished the HMO? And if that's the case, then they don't require a licence. If it's still a HMO, then according to this, that they used to be prior to the mandatory licence requirements. The other one is going back to 5.2, which is Head of City Services Waste. It gives them an option of what waste receptacles they would require. are we aware of what they require? Because I am concerned that if they go for the one large bin, which is 660 litres or 1,100 litres, you're not going to get that in that front forecourt area. So will they be having a number of smaller bins within that area, and can it accommodate, if we're talking about HMO for 5 people now, so are they going to have 5 bins plus the recycled material stuff, the recycled stuff as well, and is it available, and is the accommodation big enough for that? Thank you, Chair.
Just picking up on your query regarding the parking survey, it was a number of streets surveyed. I've got a slide which shows those streets. I'll share that if I can find it and share it.
I have it to hand if you want me to share.
I think I've got it now, thanks Kevin. Yeah, so if you can see the streets lined in red, these are the areas that the parking survey looked at. So multiple streets. And then your point about one of the objectors has referred to the neighbouring property previously being occupied as a HMO, so our records do not show that as being a HMO any longer. We did pick up on the presence of one other HMO within the 50-metre radius, and that is indicated by the green square, which I think is number 188. So our records don't show that the neighbouring property is in use as a HMO.
Chair, if that 174 property now decides they want to put it back into HMO...
They'd need planning permission.
Right.
Councillor Perkins.
So, how long does the planning permission remain as HMO? Because we seem to sit here in committee and do planning permissions for lots in this particular area, but obviously they have to go to licensing. Does licensing also see how many have got planning permission for that to run as a HMO?
No, so, excuse me, the concentration test is a planning test to see whether there's an over-concentration in the area. It's not a licensing test. Licensing look at the management of the HMO, room sizes, and provide comments in that regard. So they sit together, but as I said, they operate independently. Sorry, I forgot any question completely.
So the HMO planning permission.
Yeah, sorry, how long do they last? Okay, well, you've got 5 years to implement a planning permission. Once it's implemented, it would run effectively until there was another lawful intervening use. So you can convert from, we're talking about here, a C4 planning use as a HMO. You can convert to a C3 dwelling under permitted development rights. You can go one way, you can't go the other way, which is why this application is before us. They need planning permission to revert back.
So we only see the ones that are registered as HMOs. We don't see those with planning permission to be.
So we've got the planning permission records, so we can see which ones have planning permission. Now, we don't always know whether those planning permissions have been implemented, but if we assume they are, we'll include those in the calculation.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I missed a point that Councillor Watkins raised regarding waste. So we've got comments from our waste officers, and they've said that they would anticipate the property as a HMO having a single 180-litre bin curbside collection with recycling bags and boxes, so it's comparable to the house which is there currently.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howells.
Could I check when the 50-metre radius drawing work was completed to plot the maps? Because there are 5 properties on Clean Road which have all been granted licences in the last 2 weeks for HMOs. So I just want to make sure that all those have been taken into account. So looking at the licensing register, 13th of February, 115 Clean Road, 13th of January, it's a bit older, 70 Clean Road, 18th of Feb, 100 Clean Road, 19th of Feb, 79 Clean Road, and 18th of Feb, 88 Clean Road, which will all be sort of, might just be outside the 50-metre radius. But
so 188 is within the 50 metres, and that's where the green square is. The assessment was done during the course of the consideration of the application, so I'd say, and it's been with us a few months now, but I'd say it was done the early part of this year. But as part of that consideration, we'll look at what our records show, but we'll also consult with environmental health, and they'll tell us what licences they have pending. So we're not just looking at existing records, we're also looking at what ones that are under consideration. So that would have been picked up as part of that.
okay. 146 certainly seems like it would be within that sort of radius, but it's hard to tell from the plan.
Sorry, Councillor, if you look at the plan on just above paragraph 7.8 in the report, thankfully it does have the numbers of the properties on Cullion Road.
Right.
So
Okay.
I think we could safely say, for example, that the number 144 is outside of that, because that would be on the even side of the road. Obviously, this is 176, and there's one property to the south of that other than the Methodist Church. So I'm comfortable that that will be outside.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Councillor Watkins.
Just to clarify in regards to licensing, Chair, then we consult with the licensing of HMOs as well?
Yeah, so as part of the consideration of the application, one of the consultations that's undertaken is with licensing, and we're back and forth in terms of what records they hold, like I said, not just in terms of established HMOs or consented HMOs, but also applications pending.
So you actually cross-reference what's on the planning and actually what's on the licensing to ensure that those on, because it's a new thing, this licensing of HMOs, then you make sure that what's on the planning application corresponds with the licensing as well.
Yeah, so we're checking our records are up to date and correct. So our records won't necessarily show, or they won't show, the ones that are pending, which is why we cross-reference with licensing.
Okay, thank you. Vicky, could you go back to the street parking with the red lines you had on, please? And you're saying they're the streets which were looked at when we looked for parking? Kevin? Kevin, did you want to come back in? You're on mute if you're trying to speak to us.
Apologies, I was talking to myself there. Yeah, so going back to the methodology that I keep referring to, that is based on research done by the Chartered Institute for this profession, basically CIHT, and that research, which is quite extensive, shows that people will walk sort of 200 metres to a place of residence. So this has to be based on a 200-metre walk, not crowfly or anything like that, but a 200-metre walk that is a reasonable walk. It should also take into account that if people are kind of circulating, looking for somewhere to stop, they won't be driving up dead ends, and they won't be stopping exactly at 200 metres. They're not measuring it. So when these things are sort of presented, I will look at that and decide if it does actually fit those criteria. So, for example, some of those roads are not what I would call a drivable route. So if you drove down it and you didn't find a space, you wouldn't be able to kind of circle round and find a space somewhere else. So I wouldn't count those. So I've only looked at the photographs of the roads that I think fit the criteria, despite what's actually being presented. Again, it comes back to me being critical of their report.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, perhaps you can answer this for me as well. In regards to parking, are there any parking restrictions or residence parking only in any of the streets which you surveyed?
I'm not sure off the top of my head because it's a long time since I looked at it, but all of that is picked up in the report, and that's how we calculate. Basically, each of these roads has to be looked at, and a section close to the junctions has to be discounted for safety. Any drives have to be discounted. Any parking restrictions, whether it's blue badge or double yellows, no waiting or what have you, all of that has to be discounted, and then we calculate what's left. So that will have been gone through meticulously, but I can't off the top of my head tell you the exact results, but it will be in the report.
Any further questions? Okay. The recommendation is granted with conditions. We have a proposer, please. Councillor Owls, seconder. Councillor Perkins. All those in favour, please raise their hands. Okay, thank you. That's passed unanimously. We now go on to item number 2, which is application 24-1017, 27 Morden Road. And this will be presented by Francesca, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, this is application 24-1017 for the change of use from a 4-bedroom house to a 5-bedroom HMO. The site is located within the urban boundary approximately 800 metres north of the main D district centre and 200 metres south of the Cynllunio Road district centre. It is also located within 290 metres of Brecon Park and 270 metres of 2 bus stops on Cynllunio Road, which both provide regular services. The city centre is also located within 1.6 kilometres. The property itself comprises an end-of-terrace 2-storey dwelling located on the junction of Morden Road and Ronald Road. The property benefits from a small front garden which is currently used for the storage of refuse bins and a small amenity area with a garage at the rear with access off Ronald Road. The existing dwelling comprises a living room, kitchen, dining room, utility room and bathroom on the ground floor, and 4 bedrooms and a bathroom on the first floor. The internal layout would remain largely unchanged, however the living room at ground floor would be changed to 1 additional bedroom and the dining room would become the new living area. The rear amenity area, which measures approximately 30 square metres, would be available for the use of the residents, and part of the existing garage would facilitate off-street parking. Cycle parking would also be provided within the existing garage. No other external changes to the building are proposed. The main planning considerations of this application are the potential impacts of the change of use on parking provision and highway safety, the impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area and neighbouring properties, and the amenity of future occupiers. The proposal relates to the use of the existing dwelling in the urban area within a highly sustainable location. In addition, the concentration of HMOs in the area, should the application proceed, would be less than the 15% threshold at 13%. Consequently, HMO concentration levels are not grounds to refuse permission in this case. Having regard to the amenity of neighbouring occupiers and opportunities for increased noise and disturbance, 28, 53 and 54 Morden Road have the closest relationship with the site. The number of bedrooms which directly adjoin 28 Morden Road at first floor level do not differ from the existing arrangement, and the communal space is at ground floor only. There is little to indicate that the resulting noise levels would substantially exceed those emitted from the four-bedroom property in C3 use. In addition, the size and configuration of the outdoor amenity area would remain unchanged and would maintain privacy for both the existing and future occupiers. The HMO standards state that single bedrooms should be at least 6.51 metres squared. Shared kitchen and living rooms for up to 5 persons should be 7 metres squared and 10 metres squared respectively. All bedrooms exceed the required space standards and contain windows providing adequate light and ventilation for occupiers. The living areas also meet minimum standards, and additional utility room space is also provided. Access to the rear yard is provided and will include a bike storage area within the existing garage. The yard size is considered acceptable for the occupancy level comparable to the current dwelling use. In addition, the property is within walking distance of Brecon Park. The existing dwelling has 4 bedrooms, and this generates a parking demand of 3 spaces. There is a garage on site which can accommodate 2 cars and bicycle parking. The proposed 5-bedroom HMO would require a total of 6 spaces, which is a net gain of 3 spaces. If we assume there are 2 off-road parking spaces in the garage, the proposed HMO would generate a demand for 4 additional on-road parking spaces. A parking survey accompanies the application, which confirms that local streets within a 200-metre radius have sufficient capacity to accommodate an additional 37 spaces. The property is not located in a flood zone, and biodiversity measures can be secured by condition. Our recommendation for this application is granted with conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you heard my evidence at the last application, and I'm afraid some of the evidence that I'm going to give this morning must be the same, because it's a very similar area. It's probably about 200 metres away from the previous one you looked at. And I'm sure you'll be very familiar with the arguments that I'll be putting forward. But each of my constituents deserve their hearing. You've had objections to this one. If you could ever find anyone who's in favour of an HMO other than the developer, I'd be interested to hear about it. But we need to restate the application for 27 Morden Road and the change of use from a 3-bedroom dwelling into a 5-bedroom HMO is neither wanted nor desirable. There are many objections and no support from any residents for this application. A general principle of democracy is that we do things with people rather than, in this case, to them. And this, again, is a theme that's running through all these HMO applications. This, again, is a purely formulaic application, which I would suggest has no merit whatsoever. It is merely a crib from so many applications you've heard before, with an advisor probably doing quite well out of putting the same case forward time and time again. The purpose of this application, as I've stated previously, is only a money-making scheme with no benefits whatsoever for the community. Houses that are rented nearby attract a rent of some £1,250 per month. A room in a HMO is available for at least £600 a month. How much better that the developer is getting quite rich and making a return of up to £3,000 per month. There are already 5 HMOs on Morden Road, which have recently been granted planning permission, and these 2 or 3 of them quite recently. The Morden Road, fortunately or unfortunately, is an area where the cost of houses makes it an attractive proposition just to turn them into HMOs. There are also some more HMOs on this street that don't come within the regulations, and they were probably established before these constraints were put in place. The objectors all cite traffic congestion and the lack of parking. Developers commission parking surveys, which even your officers don't give too much credence to. For the avoidance of any ambiguities, all the terrace streets between Duppool Road and Richmond Road are over capacity. The congestion is now being added to by the imposition of e-charging bays on the residents. There are suggestions that tenants of HMOs can be prohibited from owning motor cars. This cannot be enforced. I know you've heard all these objections before, and I hear what your officers say when they say they tend to be poorer people who occupy HMOs without the ability to buy a motor car. I think this needs to be challenged, because some of the cars you see on the streets around there are of very poor quality and are probably closer to the scrapyard than they are to the showrooms. The houses in these areas were built as family homes. Some of them were converted into flats in recent years. That seems to have been accepted by adjacent neighbours. The proposal now for further subdivision of them is totally unacceptable. It may be that if there was some merit in these buildings were to produce additional living spaces, but again, their intention, original intention, was for a 2 plus 2.5 family to occupy them with, of course, some larger families. Moving single people into this area does nothing for social cohesion, and it does nothing to improve the number of people we have in the area. When the Planning Committee has approved previous applications, each has been treated as an individual, with no consideration given to the wider community. Planning officers seem to give no consideration to the wider community at all, only the rights of the developers and the long-term mayhem they are creating. The local shopping centre has totally changed its retail offering, gone the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers and the utility shops that were supported by family households, replaced by cafes, fast food outlets. Is this really what we want in our society? The schools that once supported the local population have changed in terms of catchment, with children being drawn from all over the city. The school run creating further traffic problems, as there is diminishing numbers of local children, which will be the case as long as the HMOs are allowed to multiply. The catchment areas of the schools don't seem to give much prominence in the planning officer's decisions. They don't seem to talk about community at all. They only seem to talk about individual residents. You've heard the arguments put forward previously about additional litter and general antisocial behaviour. If the Planning Committee were to visit Morden Road, they wouldn't need to be told where the HMOs were. They need to look in the front gardens, and it will become very apparent to them which are private residents or rented residents and which are HMOs. This always seems to have been ignored until such actions can be proven. If you pass this today, this will excuse me, that will be the end of the planning officer's roles, and it will pass to regulating officers to try and control the problems caused. We never seem to hear from the regulating officers at Planning Committee of the problems they encounter with similar HMOs in a similar area. This is one of the greatest blights on our city today. Fly tipping and littering HMOs, such as the one proposed, are acknowledged as adding to the problem. The supplementary planning guidance you are working to, I believe, is out of date and desperately in need of amendment. It doesn't need to be slackened, it needs to be strengthened. Why are we here? We're here to represent our residents. We're not here to represent people that we may never have met or we may neither have heard of. Hence, I would ask you to look at the whole area and treat as one cohesive community which it was designed for, not the piecemeal approach that's being taken today. We are not opposed to well-designed and regulated homes for single people, and the development on Crawford Street, which is starting this month, is a good example of what we as councillors and local people welcome. I respectfully ask you to reject this application for the conversion of 27 Morden Road into an HMO, as it is unwanted and a further blight on this designated family area. Thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Heron. I now open the floor to questions.
Only one question, Chair. And have they applied for a licence for the HMO?
So in this case, they've applied for planning permission before they will apply for the licence. If planning permission is granted, they will then apply for the licence. But obviously, licensing are aware of the scheme through our consultation process.
So is that part of the conditions we put on?
No, so licensing is a separate regime, so we don't deal with licensing conditions at all.
Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. A bit like Councillor Ymddiheuriadau, really. Some of the things I'm going to say are well rehearsed. I do have sympathy with a lot of the things that he's just said, although some of them aren't exactly planning considerations. And I do understand that as far as the planning regs are concerned, most of them are complied with, and our decision is sort of forced in that sense. But in terms of the density of HMOs, again, it's the effect on the whole community that matters. And this is a really good example, I think. I mean, as Councillor Ymddiheuriadau said, there are 5 already on Morden Road. And even within our 50-metre radius, when we look at this, there may be 3, well, there'll be 3 if this one passes, 3 within the 50-metre radius. But if you actually look where they are, there's actually 3 within about 20 metres of each other. And that has a massive effect on the community. So again, I know we're restricted by planning regs, but I think in reality we do need to start thinking about the community as a whole, not just little 50-metre pot shots at a time. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so just to come back on that, obviously we do consider police comments as part of our report. The police have identified no sort of ongoing crime trends or anything in this area. Obviously, we have the 15% threshold as part of our guidance for a reason, as a measure in terms of how many HMOs can be allowed within a certain area. We do look at the 50-metre radius rather than 20 metres, so obviously I can't comment on that. But the percentage is 13%, so it is still within the 15% threshold. We have looked at a wider area as well of 100 metres, and that percentage is a lot lower, so there aren't a load more HMOs sort of outside the 50-metre radius in this case. I've been to site myself and had a look at Morden Road. I personally didn't witness sort of any issues with waste or recycling outside the front of the properties, and generally the area was kept to a good standard.
Can I just come back very quickly, Chair, please? Is that okay?
Sorry, go on.
Just a quick question. I appreciate those comments. Thank you very much. Can I just clarify why some areas are looked at a 10% threshold and some are 15%? I'm sure I'm ignorant here, but if you could just explain that to me, please.
Hiya, Councillor. It was set out in the SPG. So we've got the HMO SPG, which has a two-tier approach. It was first adopted in 2015. It's been updated subsequently 2 times since. So the research at that time indicated there was a higher percentage in certain areas, and that percentage was considered to be acceptable, which is where the two-tier approach has come from originally in the SPG.
Thanks, Andrew. Could you just give me an idea of what criteria are used or why? Like the previous application was a 10% threshold, this one's 15. What's the criteria for separating those, please?
I can't, as I said, it was set out at the time that the SPG was adopted, so the background information to the SPG would have set out exactly why the approach was recommended. That would have gone out to consultation with members of the public to raise issues, identify any comments with the proposals, and then after that we'd have made a decision as a council to formally adopt that, which is why we have the two-tier approach.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Abel.
Excuse me. Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the 50-metre radius, unfortunately this plan doesn't have any addresses on. There are 2 HMOs directly opposite, and I'd be grateful if we could confirm the addresses on them. From the licensing register, there are 6 HMOs in Morden Road currently, so this one will be the 7th. There's also one in Somerset Road as well, which I think is just a bit further down, and that's probably right on the edge of the bottom of the map that's shown in the officer's report. But I just wanted to make sure they'd all been caught because there have been recent determinations, recent licences granted, sorry.
Yeah, so one of the properties within the 50-metre radius is 55 Ronald Road. I must be honest, I can't see the number on the second one. I would presume it's 53, possibly Morden Road, based on the numbering that we've got available. We did actually ask licensing for a list of any HMO properties that they had within this area, and that's been cross-referenced with the plan that's in my report, so that is correct. So there aren't any that licensing are aware of that we haven't got on this plan.
So, if that is 55 Morden Road, there is also 51 Morden Road, which has got a licence as well, which is 3 doors down. But you're saying the other one is Ronald Road rather than Morden Road, the one at the top of the picture. So I'm just wanting to make sure that one isn't missed, and then that takes it over.
The 55 is shown on the corner. So 55 and 51, they're numbered on Google, effectively, are the 2 indicated on the plan.
That's 51 and 55?
Yeah.
So there's single number houses in Ronald Road, then, right?
Yeah, there are some A's and some splits for flats.
Okay.
But there's about 75 properties on Morden Road in total. And as I said, there are 6 HMOs if this one was to be approved.
Okay.
Just looking at the road level, that's not the 50 metres.
Okay.
Councillor Rheoli.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the explanation, we mentioned the 15 and the 10% regarding the thresholds. Why can't we apply the 10% here? What's stopping us?
Well, the SPG advises the approach to be advocated. It is guidance, but obviously that guidance was based on evidence presented at that time. We'd have to have different evidence about the impact of proposals to start using a different threshold. We've got to be consistent in how we determine these applications.
Can I come back, Chair, please? Thank you, Chair.
Please do.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that, and as we said earlier, as I said earlier, that the SPG is for guidance only, and that I accept consistency. What is stopping us from trying to adopt a new consistency now, going forward, in certain areas down to 10%?
So to do that, we'd have to consider, as I said, from my perspective, the appropriate route to do that. Going back historically, when the LDP was adopted in 2015, the C4 HMO use class had not been introduced. This is why in Newport the SPG was adopted and updated subsequently to ensure there was a suitably robust manner to consider applications. So going forward, we're in the process of preparing the replacement local development plan. We will be looking at a policy as part of that to consider, going forward, noting members' concerns about the different approaches. There's different ways you can do it. 50 metres and 100 metres, as I said, you'll all have different views on that in the grand scheme of things. My view is 100 metres in general increases the amount of properties, and therefore it waters down the impact of one property. That's my view. And as I said, we've looked at the last couple of applications we've brought to committee, mindful of comments about the 50-metre radius. We have looked at a 100-metre radius, and in general, that threshold to date has all been, the percentage has been watered down. There are different approaches we can take, and we've got, as I said, some research for the replacement local development plan to do that, but we'll have to consult on that proposed approach, take comments into consideration, and it would then be examined. So that would be the best place to do it going forward.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a further question on the same subject. Okay, so as a planning committee, we always have to consider carefully how we turn applications down. If we were to delay this application for further study of applying the 10% to this area, how would we overcome that? How would that apply, to the law? How would we, be able to defend that?
Well, I don't think we could defend that myself. If you had evidence that there's a new report out, so looking at the example I referred to earlier with Councillor Howells on parking, the parking SPG was adopted in 2015. Since then, there's been a clear shift in government policy, Welsh Government policy, that we should be moving away from providing minimum parking standards to maximum parking standards. There's a clear encouragement of a change in modal shift. So there's some evidence as to why, and the various appeal decisions we have that are material considerations that we need to take into account. In this case, we've got adopted SPG. There's been nothing since then that suggested that this is causing a significant impact, having a 15% threshold in an area. So we would need that evidence. And if we do defer this application, firstly, the applicant could rightly appeal non-determination of the application. That's their right, effectively. I don't think we've got any evidence that we could support a refusal on the basis that it's exceeded a 10% threshold, because members now think that is an appropriate manner on these applications. It wouldn't be something we could come back to you by next planning committee with a clear steer on that.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Andrew.
Any further questions? Sorry, okay. The recommendation is granted with conditions. Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Perkins. Seconder. Councillor Howells, sorry. All those in favour, please raise their hands. Okay, that's passed unanimously. Thank you. The last item on the agenda is item number 5, which is appeals. Anybody have any comments, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. No, thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye.
Chair, bye.
Thanks, Chair. Bye, everyone. Bye.